This is the meeting of Handicap for the 23rd of September. It looks like we've got a full house of all of the present members of Handicap here tonight.
18.
So why don't we get started? Call the meeting to order, and let's go down the usual roll call of the members. Dave, we can go around the table, starting with you.
Dave Noyes, Compliance Manager representing HDI.
Tom Moylan, Holtec, Site Vice President.
Kelly O'Brien, Local 369.
Mike Fortini, appointed by the Senate Minority Leader.
Pine Dubois, appointed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Jim Lampert, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Kevin Canty, Vice Chair of the Plymouth Select Board, Plymouth Select Board Representative.
Mary Lampert, appointed by the Senate President.
Seth Pickering from Mass DEP, representing the Secretary of EOEEA.
Andrew Gottlieb, representing Cape Cod, appointed by Governor Baker.
David Bryant, Massachusetts Emergency Management.
Greg Wade, representing the Department of Public Utilities.
And on the screen, Mary?
I'll go. Sorry, there's two Marys. Mary Waldron, representing Old Colony Planning Council.
Mary Gatzlick, Senate Minority Leader appointee.
And Jack?
Jack Priest, representing the Commissioner for the Department of Public Health.
All right. First item on the agenda is the minutes, which I circulated a few days ago. I hope people have had an opportunity to read them. Any comments, suggestions, changes on the minutes? I really have to congratulate the people who put these together. It's a terrible job, and they do an extraordinary job of accomplishing it. Any comments? The only thing I noticed, and frankly, these came in a little later than they might have, so we still need to add on the last page of the minutes, the list of documents that were used at the last meeting. I've started on that. I've got to go through the video to make sure I have it right with the panel's permission. I will do that. And I guess subject to that, I'd ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. We have to do this by roll call. Dave?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Pine?
Abstain.
Mike?
Yes.
Mary Gatzlick?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Kevin Canty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes.
Jack Priest?
Yes.
Seth Pickering?
Yes.
Dave Bryant?
Abstain.
Jeffrey Wade?
Gregory Wade,
Gregory,
yes.
I'm sorry. My mistake. I apologize.
That's fine.
Excuse me, didn't you vote?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I just didn't heard. Christopher Callahan?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
Mary Waldron?
Yes.
If I have the count right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 in favor, and 2 abstentions. I agree with everybody else? 1, 2, 3, okay, missed my 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Correct, 14 it is. All right, motion passes. The next item on the agenda, Mr. Noyes.
Okay, so the September update for the facility status. This is the standard waterfall that is presented each meeting. A major change in this is that on the first flow path, which is the characterization and license termination planning, the license termination submittal has been delayed 1 year. So it was intended to be submitted in September of this year. It is now intended to be submitted in September of 2025. The move of the change for the license termination plan affords us the ability to be able to gain lessons learned, not only from Oyster Creek, who has recently submitted, but within the industry, there have been 2 facilities that submitted license termination plans and subsequently withdrew them. So it'll give us the opportunity to understand what lessons learned there are from the withdrawal of those 2 plans, and it will reduce the interactions necessary with the NRC in order to gain license termination plan approval. There's no additional cost associated with the movement of that activity, and there is no endpoint schedule change with respect to expected license termination plan approval or final status survey for the site. For the Isfasi lane, we are submitting in October the final for the restoration of the haul path. So that is with the Conservation Commission for the town of Plymouth, and the plantings have been monitored. So that should provide the final closure for restoration of the Isfasi haul path back to its original configuration.
Excuse me, Dave, what plantings?
They were plantings that were done after the haul path was removed. So
These are not the plantings between the Issafi and Rocky Hill Road, am I correct?
they are not, no. There were separate plantings, indigenous plantings that had to be restored as part of the removal of the haul path. That was the temporary roadway that connected the industrial part of the facility with the old shorefront area. The remainder of the swim lanes we'll talk about in individual slides, with the exception of site restoration, which will follow the demolition and dismantlement of the buildings. So the specific demolition activities that are currently ongoing, we've transitioned from the demolition of buildings and structures on site down to pad level to begin demolition of parts of the plant, the equipment and facilities that were the part of the inside of the physical plant. The demolition activities that are ongoing now is the removal and disposal of 12 augmented off-gas system charcoal adsorber vessels. The augmented off-gas system took the non-condensables that had been removed from the condenser, routed them through the augmented off-gas system to allow decay of short-lived radioisotopes, and then allowed for the discharge of the that off-gas effluent via the main stack. These individual charcoal vessels are about 19 feet high. Each one weighs on the order of about 3 to 4 tons. And the individual vessels themselves are radiologically contaminated due to the process that they were utilized for when the plant was online. There's also an asbestos component to them from the gaskets that were on the piping lines, and also some painting that were on the foundation. So it's a controlled rigging evolution for the lifting of each of these individual 12 vessels, and then packaging for shipment and disposal. So for demolition activities, the overall status chart, the only thing that's changed since our last update is the augmented off-gas building is the light yellow building. It kind of abuts the main process buildings, the reactor building and turbine building. So that's turned yellow because there is active demolition going on with the removal of those absorber vessels.
But not of the building itself at this point in time?
That's correct. Yeah, it's all internal equipment at this point. For reactor internal segmentation, a significant milestone at the site, we have completed segmentation of all of the reactor vessel internals. We are in the process of demobilizing the equipment that was required in order to be able to perform that activity. But all of the individual pieces within the reactor vessel have been removed, segmented, and are in the process of being packaged for ultimate staging on site and then shipment once we get the cast system approved for being able to ship that level B and C waste for disposal. For a regulatory update, we did in the last, the second quarter inspection, we received an NRC severity level 4, which is a low safety significance violation for failing to establish the appropriate radiological work controls for an activity such that airborne activity was generated and one individual received an intake of radioactive material. This was classified by the NRC as being low safety significance. We did perform a causal evaluation, extracted lessons learned, and we have established additional rigor with respect to our radiological planning for these types of activities. Also in the regulatory update, we have, as I discussed, we did delay the submittal of the license termination plan. We did formally appeal the Mass DEP denial of our surface water discharge permit amendment request. And we are preparing our NEPDES and surface water discharge permit renewal. We're up for the 5-year renewal. That application is due to be submitted by the end of this year.
Dave, this is for the 2 currently in effect permits. I believe they were issued in 2020.
That's correct. Yeah, so they have to be submitted 6 months prior to the expiration of the permit.
Yeah.
Does the permit application speak to any issues associated with the issue that's under contest with the appeal?
The permit that is being submitted closely mirrors the permit amendment request. So it includes Outfall 15.
So you're asking for that authority again under a separate permit proceeding?
That's correct.
One question. For the exposure of a worker, what specifically is NRC's criteria for it being low safety significant?
Their assessment was that it didn't challenge any dose limits for the individual or multiple individuals. The individual exposure, as identified in the NRC inspection report, was an internal exposure of about 130 millirem. So it didn't challenge any specific dose limits for the individual.
So that's the criteria. Had it challenge the dose limit, then it would be a different story.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of things that go into their assessment with respect to safety significance, the degree of control, the number of individuals that are involved are usually part of their assessment. But they'd have to tell you exactly what went into their assessment.
Mr. Chair, can I ask one other question before we get off the slide? Jim?
Surely, Andrew.
So just to refresh my understanding, the 4-year add to the closure date was associated with uncertainty about the permit, right?
There were 2 4-year additions.
The second one?
The second one was due to uncertainty, yes.
Right. So were there not uncertainty? Is it fair to say that 4 years would go away?
Be certainly under evaluation.
So given that, you have an interest in doing it more rapidly, is there any intent on your part to ask DEP to do an expedited review of your permit application, or your permit appeal, so that the uncertainty can go away sooner than later?
I don't know of a process for requesting an expedited appeal. I'll have to look into that.
Were there one, would that be of interest to Holtec?
Yes.
Try and move this along as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Thank you.
And for radiological waste site source term reduction, we have year-to-date in 2024 shipped just over 20,000 cubic feet of radioactive waste with a curie content of 43 curies. In this slide, we have provided a correction for previous data that was reported in this forum for 2021. Initially, the 2021 calendar year was reported at 58,000 cubic feet and 933 curies. We have corrected that based on a review of our data and an audit. It was actually 61,000 cubic feet and 870 curies.
Couple of questions. Dave, how many trips to a waste disposal site do those totals add up to?
I have that here. That was, since 2019, 307 shipments.
Have there been any spills, accidents, derailments, truck spills, or anything?
No, there have not.
Okay. So we've done over 300, we haven't had an incident, but we can't transport the water because we're afraid it's going to spill. Rhetorical, you don't have to answer.
Well, I'd like to. In this forum, I think we've repeatedly discussed the fact that from an environmental standpoint, the disposition of the water, HDI and Holtec believe that it is the environmentally responsible method for disposal of the water, even independent of the potential for an accident.
Okay, but many times the hazards of transporting this volume of water have been cited as a reason why it's disadvantageous. And you've got an exemplary record of transporting vast amounts of radioactive waste to an ultimate disposal place, building a lot of confidence in your ability to do so. I don't know why that would erode when it came to transport of water.
I'm not shutting that one down at the moment.
What about Vermont Yankee? They ship their water. Were there any problems? Was there contamination, spills, tips?
I don't know of any spills that have been reported for the water that is transported from VY. The one advantage that Vermont Yankee has is that they can ship their water directly via rail, so that allows them to be able to make a shipment of almost 20,000 gallons in an individual shipment. where our shipments would be on the order of about 4,000, and the energy associated with shipping that via truck rather than rail.
Rail at Middleborough?
Yes, yeah, well, no, we can't transfer water in Middleborough. The closest place that we'd be able to transfer water from from a tanker truck to a train would be in western Pennsylvania.
Dave, you mentioned, I believe, 307 shipments. Is that truckloads?
Yes, yep.
And I have a question, Dave, if I may, and those truckloads were all solid waste, correct?
They were.
So big difference between transporting solid waste and liquid waste. If there is an issue with solid waste, it's a lot easier to clean up than if there's an issue with the liquid waste, correct?
Yeah, I mean, solid waste inherently is easier to contain if something were to happen than liquid waste would be.
Thank you very much.
But you've said that liquid waste is really not very toxic. I understand that your assessment of what's in the water, you had hoped to discharge into the bay, or that you are currently, and have since you own the plant, evaporating in the atmosphere, that it's not particularly dangerous. Is that correct?
It's not particularly dangerous. It does contain low levels of radionuclides. There are shipping requirements. There are containment requirements. It would not be desirable to release it directly to an unmonitored portion of the environment in a way that's not measured and quantified.
Evaporation is not treated, correct?
No, but it is monitored and qualified and reported.
Mrs. Lambert, are you familiar with remediating a liquid waste versus a solid waste? Because there's a big difference.
Can
As
you
Mr.
repeat that? I
Noyce
can
has
understand
said.
you, but it's a very pretty background. Could you
I'm
repeat
sorry,
what
did you
you
repeat the
said?
question?
I couldn't understand you.
I said, are you familiar? I asked if you were familiar with how a liquid waste is remediated versus a solid waste. There's a lot more effort, energy, and monitoring involved in doing a liquid waste remediation than there is a solid waste remediation. You need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I could figure that one out, but I also can figure out you can't get it out of Cape Cod Bay, whether it's evaporated into it or whether it's discharged into it. But thank you for the comment.
Understand, as Mr. Noyce said before, I understand as Mr. Noyce said before, Holtec is not evaporating the water as a treatment, using evaporation as a treatment of the water. It's naturally occurring. You have a pool, you understand that. And that's it. Sorry. Just had to talk about that.
Finished the report, Dave?
I am.
Okay. If those of you who had time to look at the agenda, you'll notice that there is an attachment for this part of Dave's. And that attachment was the list that I could put together going through past meetings of information that various members of the panel had requested from Holtec. There were, I think, 18 information items. Do you have the list up there, Dave?
I have my answers to the questions. I don't have the list.
So, basically, you emailed me a few days ago and said there were, I believe, 8 questions that were largely financial and that you weren't going to answer those. I think I have that right.
That's correct on the grounds.
I'm guessing they were mine.
On the grounds that they provide both business sensitive and proprietary information.
No, that's what you said.
Yes,
And you said you have the answers to the other questions?
I do.
Could you just go through them, and it might be a
Well,
good
why
idea.
don't we ask them just so that it's on the record so that people have
You
a
have the
context
question, how do you
to what
want
I'm
to
answering.
handle this?
Why don't you just read the question and
Okay, the
I'll
first,
answer.
I may slightly paraphrase. The first question has to do with how much water was added to the spent fuel pool at various times. We've discussed that subject a couple of times, and you asked me to put it in writing and get it back to you.
Okay.
So I asked for what were the base numbers of, for the 12-month periods, hopefully corresponding to what you gave us in terms of how the water was disappearing, so it makes it easier
Sure.
to compare.
So we don't track the water that we add. Probably less than 500 gallons of water has been made up for specialty use items like flushing or cleaning specific pieces of equipment. Other than that, the water that is used for makeup is the water that comes from the Taurus, goes through the rad waste processing system, is cleaned up and is used for makeup. That's why you see the reduction from the evaporation in the pool. The makeup is coming from the Taurus.
But you don't have any records that show how much you added over periods of time, is that accurate?
Of each individual makeups from the Taurus?
Of how much water did you add from the Taurus over the 12-month periods? Because I think that's what you used when we were looking at how much water has evaporated.
No, not over each specific period of time. I mean, I know where the Taurus started and where it is right now. You can see that from the chart. So you know how much water has been made up over that period of time. The Taurus water reductions are makeup to the dryer separator pit and reactor cavity and spent fuel pool. So you can assume any reductions from that table are makeup activities from the Taurus.
During the year period that table
Yes,
represents.
that's correct.
I'm going to pause for a second because Mike Jackman had his hand up for a question.
Panel member.
Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, and recognizing I'm not a panel member, for Mr. Noyes. Can you give us an estimate of how many truckloads would be needed to transport the water if that was the option that was taken?
It's about 4,000 gallons per truckload. So I don't have the math right in front of me, but with approximately 930 to 940,000 gallons on site, it's pretty easy to figure out how many truckloads. I just don't have the number in front of me.
Mike, if I recall, somebody here did the math. It may have been Jack at the last meeting, and the number was something over 200.
Thank you.
Okay, Dave, second one, with the extension of the cleanup date, will the indirect and overhead rates be adjusted to reflect the work being done?
Yes, they will.
And is that reflected in the update you provide to the status of the fund?
Yes, it is.
You said that alternative evaluations have been sent to DEP.
Right.
I understood that either you or Mr. Pickering were going to circulate what had been sent to DEP and went into that detail. I haven't seen those papers.
Yeah, I was mistaken that the alternatives evaluation provided a specific figure for the cost for road to disposal for the liquid waste. It provided a kind of a qualitative assessment, but did not provide a numerical figure. Holtec provided the figure of approximately $20 million. That was 2 years ago in an assessment of what it would take to dispose of the water via truck and
Yeah, that I believe was Dr. Singh's estimate in a letter to Senator Markey.
Yeah, I do know that it came from Dr. Singh. I don't know what forum it took, but yeah, that is the figure that Holtec has provided.
The next question.
What number?
I'm at
20 million.
No, number question.
I'm at 11 now.
Okay.
The next question was actually how many truckloads had been shipped, and I think you just answered that, it was
Yes,
307.
307, yes.
What's your best estimate of how many more truckloads of solid waste there will be?
It's very difficult to assess that. A lot of it depends on the characterization of the waste as we start to get into characterizing individual components. So there's not a direct correlation with how many shipments. That in concert with question number 12, based on the PSDAR, our estimate is that we have approximately 1.25 million cubic feet of waste left to be shipped. I don't have the specific figures with respect to Curie content, but expect that that would be proportionally higher because there will be a higher percentage of B and C waste class shipments than what we have made to date.
And that's because of the source of that solid waste. Am I right or wrong?
Well, it's the fact that because of the caste system, we have not made a lot of B and C waste shipment. A lot of that is either still retained within the volumes on the refuel floor or is on our interim waste staging facility that we set up on site.
At the July NDCAP meeting, you said you'd sent draft chapters of the license termination plan to NRC. For some reason, the NRC's told me it doesn't have copies of those, which I cannot understand. Do you have copies that you could send to the panel?
We have copies, but we won't release them until we finalize them. Those when we are ready to formally submit those to the NRC, we'll provide them.
Could you generally tell us what is in those chapters, just the general subject matter?
I can provide in a future meeting, I can provide there are 8 chapters. Chapter number 8 is environmental. Chapter number 6 is the DCGLs for surface and subsurface activities. Chapter 1 is general information. They all have their specific role in the license termination plan.
Yeah, if you could circulate just a description of what the subject matter of those chapters are.
I'd be happy to do that. It's in New Reg 1700 is the NRC document, and that lays it out, but I'd be happy to circulate it.
Okay, at the July meeting, I hope people can hear me, you said that earthwork was anything that had to be graded back to its original 1967 condition. Did I get that accurately?
You did.
You said also there'd been no change in the planned site restoration since the PSDAR.
That's right.
The PSDR said that during demolition, you'll remove above-ground structures to a nominal depth of 3 feet, then conduct characterization studies, and that, without reading everything, then you'll backfill. In the cost estimate, you said the site restoration costs are the costs associated with conventional dismantling, demolition, and removal from the site of structures and systems. What's conventional dismantling, demolition, and removal?
It's basically, and it's going to sound, the general dismantlement and removal of material from the site is the removal of all structures. Final earthwork is the grading of the final site back to its original intended topography.
I guess that's what confuses me a little, because the site itself, at least as defined in the settlement agreement, is a lot bigger than where the buildings are. So are you grading areas other than roughly where the buildings are?
The licensed property to the extent that it has been changed.
And
So
that
the majority of the licensed property is deeded forestry land and has not been graded and has not been touched.
So basically, the only grading is really going to be in the areas where 3 years ago there were buildings.
That's correct, yeah.
Buildings, but do you include also pipes and tanks?
It would include pipes, tanks, structures, yes.
Yeah. And for everyone's information, that's basically the way that structures are defined in the settlement agreement. Back to the question, I hate to use, we've sort of been moving around for the last few meetings. You have said that Dr. Singh basically won't let HDI or Holtec Pilgrim fail. I asked at the last meeting, and I think this is a quote, will Holtec, and by Holtec I include the entire Holtec organization up to and including Holtec International, be responsible for all of the costs of decommissioning up to and including VSV?
Okay, so Dr. Singh in the subcommittee hearing said, this company will never, never fail to fulfill its contractual obligation. That is a commitment from me, and I am the founder. No matter what happens down the road, we will not ever breach our obligation to the counterparties, in this case to the state of Massachusetts and any other entity.
So
I can't say it any clearer than
So
he
is
did.
that a yes to my question?
It is.
Thank you.
And by obligations, do you mean everything is in the settlement agreement?
Yes, it's an obligation.
Question 18, we just talked about buried pipes, structures, et cetera, being removed to a depth greater than, to a depth of 3 feet below grade. Am I right that that's current grade?
Yes, yeah, that's current grade.
And it also says that you will abate all asbestos materials. If a building or structure goes greater than 3 feet below current grade, have samples of that structure been taken, or will they be more than 3 feet below?
They will in all cases. We have to survey anything that's going to remain in the ground to ensure that it doesn't have any oil or hazardous material. Asbestos is an oil or hazardous material. So that material either needs to be abated or a beneficial use determination needs to be approved by the state.
Am I right that some of these buildings go down 25 feet or so?
Yes.
So are you basically going to take samples all the way to the bottom of those buildings?
Yes, we are.
Are you going to share any of the samples with state, for example, DEP, DPH?
We have right along for the samples that we've taken for asbestos. So yeah, we will do full characterization of any of the subgrade structures that will remain, and that information will be shared with the state.
Shared, will there be splits?
We're not planning on doing splits. We can have that dialogue with the state if that's something that they're interested in. We use a state licensed individual to perform those activities.
That would be atypical for asbestos surveys, Mary. Splits would not be typical.
Could you explain that, Seth? I'm not
Yeah,
sure I
okay,
quite got
explain that.
Well,
What would?
I mean, we implement the asbestos program every day, and when surveys are done for demolition, we might take some samples, but there are licensed professionals that take samples and analyze them, and we accept their results. So it's atypical, but we can talk about that when we get there if you want.
I guess I'm just not clear on exactly what is atypical. That's my only confusion.
Split samples for asbestos.
Okay, fine. That's what I
Yeah.
wanted.
Does it have anything to do with quantity? Because I
No.
well imagine the reactor from 3 feet to 25 feet and the size of it, where all of the concrete, my understanding, it has asbestos mixed in with it.
I don't see how that's relevant. I'm
Well,
talking.
because there'd be a lot of asbestos, that's why.
Well, Mary, we do a lot of asbestos work every day, a lot of other places, so it's really no different. I'm sorry, does that
No,
make sense to you or not? I mean,
No, it doesn't make sense.
how does it not make sense to you? Explain that to me so I can maybe answer the question
No,
better.
the reason it doesn't make sense, I would think that seeing as how the licensed site professional subcontracts to Vertex, who has somebody to test for asbestos, all of which are working for Holtec. Not that I don't trust them, I just think it would be to the state's interest to have a state set of eyes look.
Well, the survey is part of the process at any asbestos site. You have to do a survey to do demolition. So that's part of the deal.
Seth, your samples go out to independently certified laboratories
If we
that are
take-
required
yeah,
to
if we
be
take 'em, yep.
certified. They're not Holtec's laboratories.
Right. And so, I haven't said that we wouldn't take samples.
Excuse me, Seth, I thought
We'll-
you said if we take them, so only yours would, not Holtec's, am I right? It's only if you take samples.
It's not without precedent that the, person doing the demo has samples taken and analyzed, and we take them sometimes as well.
No, and I guess I was just trying to clear up and understand Jack's question. What I understood was that if they're your samples, that was the labs Jack was talking about.
Yeah, it would be,
No.
it would,
It'd be an independent lab.
it would be our lab.
Okay, I just wanted to
Yep.
clear up whose samples they were. Any other questions for Mr. Noyes? Thanks a lot, Dave. Wait a minute, I
Mr.
do have
Chair,
one more, Dave, excuse me. And this was really
Okay.
raised by the fact that obviously there were about 10 questions that you were concerned with proprietary information. And the settlement agreement says that every month you will provide the Commonwealth with a monthly project status report with a lot of information in it. Have you been filing those monthly?
We have.
Have you been filing redacted copies of those? And the reason I ask is that these apparently, according to paragraph 32 of the settlement agreement, are public record unless you and if you think there's proprietary or business-sensitive information, you will redact that and file a redacted copy without it. Do you file redacted copies?
We do.
Would you provide those to the panel, please?
They look very similar to the presentations that we make here. I can provide you with a couple of examples of them.
That
You'll
would
see
be
that
great. That would be great.
they very closely mimic what I provide at these meetings.
But the problem with those reports is they don't provide you any insight into how fixed corporate expenses are being charged over to the decommissioning fund. And a lot of our conversation has circled around the notion that ensuring there's going to be adequate funds available to complete the task. And if there's no way for this panel or anyone else to ascertain how costs are being charged to that account and how they vary given the reduction in work activity, how do we know that charges that, and money therefore that would be better spent, being held to complete the job you were charged to do rather than being used to offset Holtec's fixed costs? How do we ever make that judgment? And what basis do we have to determine the validity of your assertion that they're proprietary and they're somehow competitively protected? Who's competing?
There are a number of companies that are involved in decommissioning activities, and the specific definition that we subscribe to for business-sensitive information is that it is income, profits, losses, expenditures, or other information of commercial value with the potential to harm competitive position unless required by law to disclose such information.
And is that information in the unredacted papers you send, reports you send to?
No, that's part of what is redacted.
No, in the unredacted.
Is,
You're required to submit to the state, as I
Yes.
read the settlement agreement,
yes, they
an
get the.
unredacted one.
Yes, they get the financial information.
Thank you.
And just one other item, I was advised by counsel that there actually is a process for you to request an expedited hearing. When you get your scheduling hearing, all you have to do is ask the hearing officer to speed it up.
Okay, that'll be something that we'll have to look into. Thank you.
Look forward to hearing about that.
Anything else for Mr. Noyes? Thanks, Dave. Mr. Pickering?
Mr. Chairman, so I have update from the internal work group for our group. So on the permit modification, my update is that as previously reported, Mass DEP issued a final determination to deny Holtec's application for a wastewater discharge permit modification. Holtec has appealed this determination to the DEP Office of Appeals Dispute Resolution, OADR, which has issued an initial scheduling order. OADR is also considering several petitions by outside parties to intervene in the proceedings.
Yeah, there's 7 of them, I believe.
For now, anyway, right?
Actually, the
We'll see.
period for filing those has
Is over?
expired unless somebody asked for more time.
Okay.
For the public, could you list them, please?
I don't have the list.
You don't have.
No, I don't have the list of the interveners. You could, if you want that list, you can contact OADR. Okay, so
You want me to give it?
I'm not involved in the appeal. So
Oh.
I don't have the list here.
Okay, it's the town of Plymouth, the town of Barnstable. It's,
So-
are you ready?
Well, I'm ready. I mean, what is this, a trick? Is this a trick question? You asked me if
Hey,
I have the
no,
list and
I'm
I don't,
providing
and now
in-
you're going to give it to me?
I'm providing.
So the floor is yours. Provide the list,
Thank you.
if you wish.
I just think the public might be interested in
They
it
might be.
because it
I
is not
have
listed on the website.
No question of whether they may be interested.
There's the town of Plymouth, the town of Barnstable, the Association to Protect Cape Cod. There is Mary Lampert, James Lampert. There's Ben Cronin. And there's a couple from Dennis.
The Wilson Keenan.
Pardon me?
Wilson Keenan.
Yeah, Wilson Keenan. And so that makes 7.
Okay, we good? All set? Okay, so because of the pending appeal, DEP is unable to meet with the members of the public or discuss any issues that could implicate ongoing legal proceedings. The Healy Driscoll administration will continue to monitor Holtec's role in decommissioning the Pilgrim facility to ensure that work meets state standards to protect the environment and public health. On water evaporation, as previously reported, Mass DEP reviewed Holtec's potential to emit air contaminants from evaporation of water at the facility and determined that such evaporation activity does not require an air quality permit. The total potential to emit for regulated pollutants is less than 30 pounds. The threshold that triggers air permitting requirements is 2,000 pounds or 1 ton. Holtec has conducted updated water sampling on July 16th, 2024, and provided results to Mass DEP. Mass DEP has reviewed the data and determined it is compatible to the results of the prior sampling, which was back in May of 2023. Of the sample results that could be compared between the 2 sampling rounds, the concentration of 78% of the analytes that have the potential to evaporate decreased, and 22% remained non-detect. Given these results, Mass DEP's determination that an air permit application is not required for the evaporation of water from the facility has not changed. Jim, we will provide, we formulated like a table.
Yeah, my understanding
that
from
we
the
will-
last meeting is you said you were going to provide that data.
We'll get that to you shortly. It was really
Right.
just finalized today.
It's, just so it's not we'd like all the data, not just have summaries.
Okay, I'll
If
check.
they've
I'll
provided you
check.
full data, I think
I'll-
that's what the panel
I'll
would like
check,
to see.
yep, okay, I'll check on that.
Did DPH also take samples? Similar to what DEP took in July 16th?
Jack, do you want to answer how the radionuclides?
Yeah, we, on site, we observed the sampling. The sample went to their independent lab, and the results were shared with DPH.
So that's my bullet, my
Did you
next
share
bullet
it with
point,
the
Mary?
public?
You would have to ask Holtec if they would care to share that.
Were they provided to you, Jack? Question?
I had a discussion with Dave Noyes on the results.
Were the results provided to DPH?
I'd have to go back and look. I can't answer that.
Okay, if you would please go back and look, because if they were, I believe it's a public record.
We will share them.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep, and I've got a bullet point here to read to Jim, okay?
Sure, thank you very much.
For this?
Sorry for the interruption.
Yep, no worries. So based on DPH's review of the revised sampling, the radionuclide activity concentrations in the untreated water decreased slightly from the previous sampling period. The changes may be attributed to radioactive decay and mechanical filtration in the reactor pool. Several hard-to-detect radionuclides were sampled and identified at concentrations well below regulatory limits. On the site assessment work plan in the MCP, the Attorney General's office is working to finalize the state's response to Holtec's site assessment work plan. We cannot speak to the timing of the AGO's review. Response actions under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, or the MCP or 21E, are ongoing in response to notifications of PCBs, metals, and PFAS detections in 2022. The Phase 2 Comprehensive Site Assessment, which documents the nature and extent of contamination and contains a risk characterization, is due to be submitted by April 21 of 2025. The state has received the long list of questions sent by Mr. Lampert as part of the agenda, most of which relate to the site assessment work plan. And so with regard to answers, as stated, the state is unable to comment on any issues that would implicate ongoing legal proceedings related to the wastewater discharge permit modification denial. The state cannot answer any questions that would implicate attorney-client privilege communications with or attorney work product of any of the state's attorneys, including the Attorney General's office. If there are any questions that are factual in nature and within the knowledge and expertise of state agencies, we will endeavor to provide written responses. We can provide some responses to the questions that you provided in attachment B of the agenda. Jim?
Yep, I'm looking at
So
attachment B right now.
I'll get to that after I read the next bullet item, if
Surely.
that's what you'd like. With regard to questions related to the site assessment work plan, which was in attachment C of the agenda, as we have reported, the Attorney General's office is working to finalize the state's response to Holtec's site assessment work plan. So we cannot comment while these legal deliberations are ongoing. However, as we have stated, cleanup of the site is proceeding under the MCP, which is an iterative process with deadlines for each phase established in the MCP. Many of these questions relate to demolition activity that will still not occur for a number of years.
Okay, Seth, if I could just make a comment before you get to the questions. And I think my feeling is probably shared by a lot of other people, both on the panel and in the public. Holtec ERM submitted in February of 2022, which is 2.5 years ago, its revised site assessment plan. We were told in January of this year that that state would issue a final decision on it, quote, shortly. I don't know how DEP and the state define shortly, but it's not the way I define it, or I think anybody else rational defines it. Is there any sense anywhere within DEP or the AG's office as to when they might finally complete their job and get that out?
I can't answer that for the AGO's office.
Would you ask them? Would you ask them, please?
Yes, sir, I will.
Thank you. Because I don't think we ought to have to wait 3 years. Particularly with work going on without an approved plan. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, so attachment B.
Yes, sir.
Let's see, I have the following. So these were the questions that were asked by Mr. Nord back in March.
You know, and there are 4 of them.
Right.
And it's all in the attachment if anybody has.
Would you like me to read the questions, or do you want to read them, Jim?
I may brief them. First was for Jack Priest and Dave Noyes. Apparently, there's low-level radioactive waste buried on site at the Pilgrim reactor. Does the Commonwealth of Massachusetts knows where it's buried and how much there is?
Okay, so the response that I have is, given that the site was used as a nuclear plant, it is reasonable to assume that low-level radioactive waste is present on site. As with other radioactive and non-radioactive contaminants, site characterization and cleanup will be handled under the Massachusetts contingency plan, subject to the requirements of the settlement agreement. That's the answer.
But you don't know where or how much there is. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't have that.
Where it's buried and how much there is.
That's not true. So
That was the question, Jack.
yeah, I understand what the question was, but every utility in the United States is required to file a 5075G if there's any spilled or buried material. It's part of the decommissioning plan. They know where that sites are located, and they're required to clean those sites up during the decommissioning.
Do you know where in Pilgrim's decommissioning plan that information is?
You would have to ask Holtec.
Dave?
I don't know specifically where it is. I know that the historic site assessment provided an evaluation of all the 5075 Gulf reports, and that, I believe, is an attachment to the ESA work plan, but I'd need to locate it.
Thank you. Second question, according to some former energy experts, about 60% of the radioactive water vapor from Pilgrim will fall back into the ocean off the Massachusetts Act. This seems to violate the Ocean Sanctuaries Act. Why is there no enforcement? This is Mr. Noyd's second question.
So my answer is this question relates to legal and enforcement determinations, and we cannot comment on these matters.
And I assume that the legal, your problem is that they've now appealed?
I can't say.
Because this question was asked of you long before they appealed.
Understood.
Okay. Third question according to Marco Coltefen, of PhD, the forced evaporation of the radioactive water, all the radioactive water at Pilgrim will create a concentration of radionuclides on site 1 million times that found in Massachusetts coastal waters. What safeguards are in place from the state of Massachusetts or the NRC to protect our regional environment from those toxins? What is Holtec's plan for the proper final handling of this incredibly dangerous residual waste? That's the question.
So my answer is, as the state has reported, Mass DEP reviewed Holtec's potential to emit air contaminants from evaporation of water at the facility and determined that such evaporation activity does not require an air quality permit. In its July 19, 2024 response, Mass DEP indicated that in 2023, I'm sorry, did I say July 19, 2024? I'm sorry. So in its July 19, 2024 response, Mass DEP indicated that in 2023, radioactive particulate and tritium releases to the air from Pilgrim Station were well below the NRC standards as published in the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station 2023 Annual Radiological Environment Operating Report submitted to the NRC. So further inquiries about this topic should be directed to the NRC, which oversees compliance with the applicable standards.
Do you happen to know the weight of the tritiated water that's been released?
No. You could ask the whole tech.
Well, the reason I'm asking the question is you talk a great deal about, oh, we got 20 or 30 pounds of this. I would expect the weight of the tritiated water is much, much larger. Could you find out?
Well, a gallon of water weighs 8.34 pounds.
That's not the tritiated, that did not include tritiated. I don't believe that 8 pounds included tritiated water because you didn't talk about radioactive.
Well, you're asking me about the weight of water and how much was
Yeah,
evaporated? So
we have evaporated to
so
date something over 1 million gallons of water that contains a lot of tritiated
Yeah.
water. I'm asking, we supposedly know how much tritium has been related. I suggest that the information is available to determine the weight of that tritiated water, and I'd wonder how that compares to your 1 ton a year.
So I can't answer that, I don't have it, but I believe that you could do a mass calculation on the tritium, which would be a radionuclide.
Yeah, it is an even smaller number than the non-radiological numbers when we did it, and we evaluated it.
The radioactive material I'm speaking of is the tritiated water, not simply a tritium atom.
Okay, so noted. So what is your question?
My question is how much does the tritiated, how much tritiated water has been released? Short and simple.
Weight-wise.
All right, well, I'll see what I can come up with, but that's something the Holtec guys are going to have to calculate.
Okay. And Mr. Nord's last question, in August '03 and February '04, radiation monitors at the Pilgrim site failed their calibration tests. If the state of Massachusetts and Holtec are indeed interested in assuring the residents near the Pilgrim site of their safety, how are these radiation monitors allowed to fail 2 calibration tests in a row? Were other monitors operating at the time, and have these failed monitors been restored to working order or replaced? That's his 4th and last question.
Yep. Okay, so the answer is this question relates to incidents that were reported to the NRC, which concluded that Pilgrim's monitoring of radiation released through the vent was not significantly impacted by these incidents. Any further or additional questions on this topic should be directed to Holtec or to the NRC.
Okay. Shall we move to paragraph B? Do you have that, sir?
But before we do, could I ask a question? You put out a sensationalized statistic about 1 million times the release of normal background.
I don't believe I put any such thing.
What was in the question? The question was a sensationalized value that is.
The question, what is in the question that was asked
Yes.
was,
Regarding Calvin.
this, according to Marco Colton,
Yes.
excuse me, the forced evaporation of all the radioactive water at Pilgrim will create a concentration of radionuclides on site 1 million times that found in Massachusetts coastal waters.
Right.
That's what he said.
And I think it's important because we're putting out a number and the public is listening to a number and they're talking about 1 million times the contamination that exists as to exactly what this individual was given to be able to evaluate. my thought process is that this individual believed that we were actually boiling the water and we were evaporating radionuclides into the atmosphere, and that was then going to be deposited in the ocean. We're not doing a service to these people by providing information in that kind of a sensationalized format that just doesn't have any basis in reality. It's not consistent with the heating of water as it's being done at the plant or with normal evaporation at the plant.
Dave, people like Dr. Caltrefan and also Dr. Buessler have done a lot of work, and they've made a number of statements. And I've seen, I believe, this comparison of how much concentration of radionuclides will be in both from, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry, I've seen this reported concentration, and my memory may be off, I apologize, I don't have the papers all in front of me, from both Dr. Caltrefan and from Ken Buessler at Woods Hole. That's the information that I have. I have not been given any information by Holtec or by anyone else that tells me what I've been told by these two doctors is wrong. If you can provide other information, if you can provide the contrary information, the one thing I have done is circulate information that I get.
Every year, we provide the information with respect to radiological releases and what that means to dose to individuals.
Right, but that is not what he's talking about. He's talking about the increase in concentration of radionuclides in Cape Cod Bay. I've not seen that in any of your NRC reports. Is it there?
No, but it is, the information that is being provided is inconsistent with the regime that's happening at the plant right now. So much so that it's fear-mongering.
I disagree that it's fear-mongering. What I am afraid of is it's the response to getting people who look at both sides of a coin.
I'm going to chip in here, and I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to do it anyways. Dave, there's approximately 3 curies of tritium in the water in the spent fuel pool. I think that's the number that Holtec provided previously.
Yeah, there's less than 12 curies left total.
So if you took 12 curies of tritium and evaporated the entire pool and put 100% of the, let's say, 800,000, 900,000 gallons into the entire volume of Cape Cod Bay, I don't know where he comes up with 1 million times greater than the current concentration of tritium that is naturally occurring in Cape Cod Bay.
You know, Jack, this is clearly much more your area of expertise than mine. You're probably
Jim, it's common sense. It doesn't the numbers just don't add up.
May I continue?
Yeah.
Since you have the expertise, it could be useful to this panel, of which you are a member, if you would have a conversation with Dr. Calfo and Dr. Buessler and talk about these numbers and let us know how that conversation proceeds and comes out, because I'm not qualified to make those judgments.
And the regulatory authority for any release from the station of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I suggest that you ask them to bring in their scientists to explain and give a primer to the rest of the panel numbers of where effluent limits come from, how they're calculated, what is the risk based on.
Jack, I don't intend to do that. All I was asking you to do is to talk to the people whose numbers you say are wrong and tell us what's right and what's wrong after you've done so.
No, actually, I have a request.
I didn't say they're wrong. All I'm saying is the numbers don't make sense. And you read it into the meeting minutes of the meeting.
Good idea.
Without any
bring Dr. Caltrefan and Buessler in
Anybody can
here.
write a paper, anybody can write a document. Where's the science behind it? That's what I'm asking.
Hopefully, we'll bring some people in and you can find out where they think the science is.
Absolutely. Welcome you to bring your doctor in to speak to his assumptions and educate the panel.
Thank you. Seth?
Okay, so I'm going to go to, it's B, right, Jim?
Right, and B, the real subject is I sent you an email with 4 questions about asbestos, and the easy way to do it is probably to look at your answers because it incorporates the questions.
Yep. Do you want me to read the questions first, or you
Why
want me
don't
to
you
just
just read in
go to my
response to your
answer?
questions, because you get both the question and the response there.
Okay, so do you mind if I paraphrase a little bit? So
Not at all.
Mr. Lampert sent me an email back in August asking about some questions about asbestos in concrete. So, you know, as we talked about a little bit earlier, asbestos is asbestos, whether it's at Pilgrim or anywhere else. We have regulations that regulate the abatement and the ultimate, disposal of it. So what I did was I responded to Mr. Lampert's email. I said, here is a link to Mass DEP's asbestos information and resource guide online, and there's a link provided. And so it says that all built structures in Massachusetts, including residential, commercial, and institutional buildings, are subject to Mass DEP's asbestos regulation at 310 CMR 715. That's the citation. So in response to your questions, I see the question was, have the concrete structures, particularly the containment in buildings, including foundations, been tested for asbestos? My answer is not that I'm aware of at this time. The containment building and the turbine building have not been scheduled for demolition yet. Is that accurate with the Holtec guys?
We do have a schedule, a broad schedule for it, but we have not characterized that concrete yet.
It's quite a ways out, though.
It is.
It's
And is
not.
it accurate there has not been any testing yet?
That is accurate.
Second question, if so, what were the results? No tests have been done to date, so there are no results. Question 3, if not, when will they be? The answer is that if applicable to 715, which is the asbestos regulation, concrete will be tested in accordance with that regulation for asbestos content, except for the owner of an owner-occupied single-family residence who performs asbestos abatement activities at the owner's residence involving solely non-friable asbestos-containing material, the owner, operator of a facility or facility component that contains suspect asbestos-containing material shall, prior to conducting any demolition or renovation, employ or engage an asbestos inspector to thoroughly inspect the area to be worked on. Therefore, owners and/or operators, building owners, renovation, demolition contractors, plumbing and heating contractors, flooring contractors, et cetera, need to determine all asbestos-containing materials, both friable and non-friable, that are present at the site, and whether those materials will be impacted by the proposed work prior to conducting any renovation or demolition activity. So the fourth question was, has anyone looked into the building plans and specifications to see what concrete mixes were used? And my answer at this time is no, we have not.
That was not a Mass DEP. I assume the same's true for Holtec.
As to whether we have looked to see
Has
whether
anybody
the
looked at
concrete
building plans
specification.
and specifications to see
The-
what concrete mixes were used?
The specifications do not indicate the
That's
addition of
what you said
asbestos.
before. Yeah. Okay.
So,
Any-
Jim, in general, the last one, this is the last one in my script, so.
I'm
it
sorry.
go- No, that's fine. But it goes to your question earlier about when. As we've reported, the Attorney General's office is working to finalize the state's response to Holtec's site assessment work plan, so we cannot comment on these legal deliberations that are ongoing. However, as we have stated, cleanup of the site is proceeding under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, Mass General Law 21E, which is an iterative process with deadlines for each phase established in the MCP. Many of these questions related to demolition activity are still in the future by probably a few years.
Any questions for Mr. Pickering?
So I've got.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Seth.
I've got a couple other things, including, I get other cleanup issues and then public safety memo. So other cleanup, there's no new update from DEP on cleanup activities. The asbestos section continues to be actively engaged in overseeing the demolition activity occurring at the site and is meeting regularly with the company. We currently have 2 non-traditional work plans that have been submitted by Holtec that are currently providing abatement services on the, what are the 2, Dave?
One of them is in the AOG charcoal vessels, and the other one is general cleanup of the retube building.
So that's ongoing. And then Mass DEP is continuing to evaluate Holtec's request to change its wastewater disposal system to a Title V system. And we've made some progress on that recently from what
And
I
that's
understand.
basically septic, right?
Septic, yes, sir. Yep. On MEMA, you good? I have this, there's no new update for MEMA. MEMA continues to work with the local partners on public safety planning and will schedule additional trainings as appropriate. So that's what I have.
Thank you very much.
Mrs. Lampert has a question.
Okay.
Yes, a question on asbestos. I sent to you a report from Stanford University and also from Southern California that was very interesting of how the asbestos particles become mobile, and particularly in relation to when fill with organic matter in it is put into the hole, let's say, of where, the internal parts of the reactor was, that it interacts with the asbestos, and then it becomes mobile. Have you, that's, I think, relevant, and for 2 ways, that how you would regard the cleanup of asbestos, whether it should be taken away or not, and also it could affect the material that would be put into the hole for the grading. So have you followed up?
I have not, no.
Do you intend to? Did you share that with anybody?
I haven't had a chance to share it with anybody yet, Mary. We have our regulations. That's our regulatory authority.
I know you have your regulations, but you have a responsibility for cleanup. If there's new information out there.
And it's an iterative process that we're going to go through in accordance with what's required by the MCP. And if that's something that needs to get looked at, when we get to that point, we'll look at it. No, we're not. No. So if you have a question, you need to ask to be recognized.
We'll get to it.
We get to it later?
Yeah.
So we're nowhere near excavating or demoing the reactor building or the turbine hall. So your pathway of risk concern, right? Weren't you just referring to things that had to do with the reactor building demo in California?
What it has to do with the issue of whether DEP will determine whether the concrete below 3 feet should remain or should not remain.
Okay, but
This would be relevant to your determination.
understood.
And I thought it was a good idea to share it with you.
Yeah, and yeah, no argument, but this gentleman's question goes to, aren't we already there? And we're not.
Mm-hmm.
I hope we can get away from a lot of legalities when we move to what was 5 here and was 5 on last week, which was to try to get a handle on what Jack Priest called, what have we done and what are we going to do? What's physically going on? Forget about legalities, just what physically are people doing? What's in the spade that goes into the ground? That's what the next portion of this meeting's all about. And I hope we'll be able to move through it and get that type of, I think it's purely factual information. That's all I'm after.
I would be also interested in the criteria that you use in determining beneficial use. Does that include economic?
It's all online, it's all in policy. I brought you a copy of the hard copy, Jim, so you can have it. That's all I have for
I'm
you
going
on
to
that.
need new glasses.
What's that?
I'm going to need a stronger set of glasses.
So, yep, that's part of regulation and some policy.
Yeah. I
That's
will
how
say
that
that
works.
frankly, I've done some looking, and I've had a hard time finding what really tells me exactly goes into a beneficial use determination. I hope what
asked
you
whether-
gave me
yeah,
has it.
economic.
Well, that's a discussion we can have, and if if you want to check in with, that's a programmatic policy thing. We can connect you with the program policy
Good.
people in Boston.
Good.
Yep.
Thank
bet.
you.
All set?
Anything else for Seth? Sit down.
Okay. Thank you.
For a moment at least. The next item on the agenda is a carryover from, 2 months ago. What it deals with is what decommissioning work has been accomplished and what is planned. Attached to the agendas for both the July meeting and this meeting was a set of questions that raised, and they were divided into, as best I could, six subject matter areas. The suggestion was made at the last meeting, I think it's a good one, and it's proved to be an even better one as we get to tonight, so we cut these in half. Try to get through the first 3 tonight and put off the next 3, that includes beneficial use, until November. If nobody has any objection, that's the way I suggest we proceed. The question beyond that is how best to proceed, because these questions, subjects were raised, concern both what the state has done and what Holtec has done. I can try to summarize what the subject is that's in the attachment, the agenda, with those 6, and then let Dave and Seth respond what Holtec can add to what has happened, what might happen, unless somebody's got a better idea on how to handle it. Shirley.
John Dombrowski from ERM is on the attendee. Is he supposed to be?
Would you like John, I assume you'd like John in.
No, I don't need for him to be in as
Okay, fine.
as a member.
Thanks, fine. The first subject there is really what information is in the ERM reports, and what did the state look at when it was reviewing them. The report, the 2022, the long initial, 3rd or 4th ERM report says, and I'm going to quote, where requested information had been previously provided, it's been incorporated into this work plan. I guess that really simply leads to 2 questions. The first, for the state, were any other materials considered by the state in connection with reviewing the work plan other than that 2022 application itself? Seth, can you answer that?
But can you repeat the question, Jim? I'm not sure I understand it.
Well, the 2022 ERM ESA revised plan
Yep.
says, quote, where requested information had previously been provided, it's been incorporated into this revised ESA work plan to facilitate review. The question is really, other than what was in that work plan, did the Commonwealth consider anything else in the course of its review of that work plan?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, a number of different people looked at it for different reasons. The 21E guys looked at the 21E stuff. I know I looked at the asbestos and the solid waste stuff and got help from my sections on that. So I can take that question under consideration and get you an answer next time.
So from what you've said, it seems like, and frankly, it doesn't surprise me, that despite what they said that it's all here in the plan, you did look at other materials when you were reviewing it. You're kind of putting words in my mouth, so I wouldn't want to say that right off the cuff. Okay, but that's the real question, is what did you guys look at when you were reviewing this?
Okay.
Okay, and I guess, Dave, the question is, did Holtec furnish them anything other than that plan, and also obviously the 2024 that you submitted in February, and obviously the 2024 that you submitted in February?
No, just the prior submittals of the plan.
Thank you. The second question refers to what is the defined quote or subject. It's not a question, it's a defined site. The settlement agreement defines the site as any place or area where radiological or non-radiological oil or hazardous material has been deposited, stored, disposed of, or placed, or otherwise come to be located. It's a pretty broad definition. My question is, and this is really to Mr. Noyes, has Holtec sampled or tested all areas on the site where radiological or non-radiological oil or hazardous materials, as defined by the MCP, and including the so-called donut hole, may have been deposited, stored, disposed of, or otherwise come to be located?
Yes, we have.
Thank you.
May I make a comment on the donut hole? There have been for years allegations.
Can you tell us
made.
what the donut hole is?
Do I know what it is?
Can you
There's
tell
an
the
area,
panel what
if you
the
go
donut
down
hole
the
is?
access road, that's between Rocky Hill Road and 3A. If you're going from the water down, it's about a third of the way down to the right. And it's an area where there are a lot of trees at one point were planted over an area that there had been allegations made that chemical waste from New Jersey had been deposited. And then an employee of Holtec, of Entergy rather, planted a lot of trees purchased in Cape Cod over the area. Those trees subsequently died, and so if you do a Google map search, you see like a hole. When we talked about this a couple of years ago, the understanding was that to determine if anything was there, monitoring wells were placed at a certain distance towards Rocky Hill Road. But my question is that, the problem I had with that is that if it picked up anything, it would only answer the question that packages of waste have been placed there and subsequently migrated. It doesn't answer the question whether stuff is there, but packaging or whatever it's in has not burst, it has not migrated. And so to me, the issue has not been properly addressed. I just thought it was worthwhile pointing out.
So Mary, our characterization found PCBs in the soil. The extent of that PCB contamination will be evaluated during the removal process. Now, state has very strict regulations on once you remove what you see, how you then have to go back and sample the surrounding areas to make sure that you understand extent. We did review groundwater monitoring wells that showed the presence of nothing other than PFAS in that area.
Yeah, but you see my point,
But Dave, I guess my
as
question on
opposed
that
to a
is-
shovel.
You finish, my understanding is that this, and probably it's third or fourth hand, so give me a little leeway. This was chemical waste, and it was buried in barrels. I don't know of what they were made. It could have been steel, it could have been a plastic of some type. My understanding is that the testing you did not show what might have been leakage from those barrels. But can I
all right.
just one? My problem is that I'm not sure that the study that was done determined whether or not there actually were barrels that may not leak for a number of years. That's my problem.
You mean that stuff is intact
The
there?
stuff is-
That
there-
still can leak?
Yeah,
despite
there
the
are
fact
barrels
it's been
there that are still
40
in-
years.
There's barrels there with chemical waste in them that are still intact, but I don't know for how long. And frankly, I don't know how many are there. That's my issue, that's my problem. It's not that you didn't look for leakage from those barrels in your groundwater testing. Are there barrels?
Yeah, that's my problem, and it was well put. And I think it would be of particular interest to the town of Plymouth that seems to have interest in that property.
Okay, next question, or subject, I hate to say questions. Plymouth Carver Aquifer is located below the site. Site, much of it slopes toward the bay, and my understanding is that underground water flows toward the bay also. The question I had is what in the ESA work plans is intended to prevent radioactivity from making its way into Cape Cod Bay or the aquifer? Are there any sections of the plan that deal with this?
Nothing.
Yes, if you could point them to me, it would be a great help.
Nothing that I know of with respect to the ESA work plan, but we have maintained a fully functional groundwater monitoring program in accordance with the NRC regulations and NEI. So we are still sampling all of our wells for radionuclides, and we'll continue to do that as we remove foundations. So if we change the contour such that some amount of radioactive material that's there is released, we will see it in those monitoring wells.
Okay, but in terms of the specific question, so far as you know, there's nothing in these ESA proposed plans themselves that deals with this issue. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Paragraph 10E of the settlement agreement says that Holtec shall comply with Chapter 21E in the MCP as applicable. Seth, what sections are potentially applicable?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you on that, Jim. I'll work on that. I don't have any of my 21E guys here with me, so.
Okay. Dave?
But, yeah, I was gonna say, maybe the Holtec guys,
Yeah.
or LSP.
Let's face it, the MCP and 21E are not small documents.
Without taking some time to look at the context, I wouldn't venture to guess.
Okay. The 2024 revised ESA says that Table 1, and we touched on this subject last week, includes two sets of calculated DCGL values. One for, quote, building surfaces based on the building occupancy exposure scenario, and another, quote, for soil based on the resident farmer scenario. I didn't see any values based on the basement inventory scenario. Why weren't they included?
They haven't been developed yet.
Okay. Will they be?
Yes.
To the best of your knowledge, was calculated DGCL values based on any hard data?
Yes, it's all based on hard data.
And can you give me a sense of just what that data was?
It's sample results.
from,
Jim, it might be useful to explain to the panel and the members of the audience what a DCGL is.
you did a great job last week. I'll let you give it a try this, 2 months ago, I'll let you do it now. You're better, you know it better than I do.
Yeah, so we talked about this before. These are the derived concentration limits that are based on sample results, and they're for each individual radionuclide. So, for example, you would calculate a DCGL for cesium-137. You would calculate a DCGL for cobalt-60, and that concentration limit's based on what your final release criteria is, whether it's 25 millirem or 10 millirem.
And is it also
So
based on each of the three scenarios? Go ahead.
Those are all sample-based calculations. They're not a priori or before you do sampling calculated.
And do you do that for each of the three scenarios?
You do that for any scenario. The document is called MARSIMS. It explains the methodology. It's a standard methodology in the industry for the decommissioning and release of any radioactive licensee.
And I believe the two scenarios we talk about in the settlement agreement are the basement inventory and the resident farmer. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. Paragraph 11E of the settlement agreement says that the ESA should include a proposed list of potential and non-radiological contaminants for which sampling will be conducted. Seth or Dave, could you point me to where in either the 2022 or the 2024 revised ESA that list is?
I can't right now, no.
Yeah, neither can I.
Could you get back to us on that?
Sure, yeah, if you get me the questions, Jim, we'll work on them, sure.
You got him, it's number 6 on the scenario.
No, all right.
The next subject, we're changing from sort of general background to the Massachusetts standard for radiation contamination. Section 10D of the settlement agreement says that Holtec shall comply with a lot of requirements and demonstrate compliance or progress toward compliance with them. At this point in time, and Dave, I guess this is probably you, do you expect to demonstrate compliance with the radiological standard at the time of partial site release?
We do, at this time, we do anticipate demonstrating compliance with the state standard
And this is at the time of partial site release?
at the time of partial site release.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Partial site release, but not the SFE. Yeah.
Sea level rise is coming up quite a few feet by then.
In Vermont, my understanding is that they don't average what's found around the site. They take a lot of readings, but they rather measure or calculate sector by sector, and no single sector is allowed to exceed the limit that, according to the settlement agreement, I guess is 10 millirem. How, in Massachusetts, Seth, how will you determine compliance with the Mass standard if the average overall for the site meets the limit, but there are portions of it that don't?
Could it be Jack?
No, I'm sorry, well, Seth or Jack, I don't care. They're the IWG people.
I don't have anything for you, Jim. You know, truthfully, Jim, when did we get these questions?
July.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to go through them, so. My
Jack?
bad, apparently, but.
The real question is,
we'll-
let's suppose
we'll
the whole
work- we'll
site
work-
meets the test.
We'll work on them.
Jack,
So what's your question?
basic
Holtec is,
question is,
Holtec is required to meet Massachusetts regulatory requirements
that's not my
for
question.
the final dose limit. They are required to follow the regulatory agency NRC's requirements and models for site cleanup.
Let me,
Once they've completed that, and Jim, we're also talking about what might be a shovel in the ground 10 years from now. Whether those standards change or adjusted based on how science changes over that period, that's when that would be evaluated.
Yeah.
But until we actually put a shovel in the ground and really understand what's there, what's left, were there any leaks? Were there any areas that are not appropriate to average? I can't answer that question.
I guess the basic question I'm asking, and you touched on it in the last part, is when the state does this type of analysis, do you look at the average for an entire site? How do you handle the situation when portions of the site are above your standard and other portions are below? That's the specific question.
It's been my experience that we look at each site is different. What's the impact? How large of an area is it? It's been my experience with other decommissioning projects that they have opted to remove the material and not average. They are allowed by regulation to average.
In discussions in drawing up the settlement agreement, you were part of that, and there was a lot of discussion of the importance of getting into the settlement agreement the basement inventory model, which is not taking an average across the interior, but going section by section. And if you have a section that exceeds the 10 or less, then that has to be dealt with. Long conversations with Seth Schofield about this, and I believe you were part of them. So in that
The regulations, right. So the basement inventory model. So the first the model that the majority of decommissioning sites use is the resident farmer model.
Mm-hmm.
And based on feedback that we had from the public as we were working through the settlement agreement, we also included the basement inventory model.
Mm-hmm.
So until we're in the basement and we're looking at what those areas are, that would be a time for another discussion. I have no idea what those models are going to look like. As I said, we haven't even put a shovel in the ground yet.
Just to summarize, Jack.
It's way premature to have a discussion about the specifics of what those areas would look at. And I'm not trying to be evasive. It's just, I can't answer that in September of 2024 of what that area is going to look like in probably 2032.
But that wasn't the question. The question simply was a definition of basement inventory and how that is done. So it's because that's why it was put in the settlement agreement.
So
but that was
I'm
helpful.
happy to come back for the next meeting with a definition of how the basement inventory model is calculated.
Jack, did I correctly understand you to say that in practice, you look at sectors, but the regulations permit averaging?
That's correct.
In a different situation.
Okay. Speaking of definitions, when you go and read the regulations, we talk about the lovely word TEDE. What is it? Does it include dose not only from activity relative to cite soils, but also any dose from radioactivity that remains below ground, indoor buildings, outdoor buildings? What is it?
TEDE is the total effective dose equivalent. It's the sum of the external exposure and the internal exposure, independent of where the source of the ionizing radiation is from.
But it would include doses above ground, below ground, et cetera, and so forth. Is that right? I'm
The
just trying to understand what it is.
the dose is calculated to an individual regardless of the direction the radiation is coming from.
And regardless of from where that radiation may be coming from. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Thank you. Believe it or
Mr.
not,
Chairman.
folks, we're getting there.
Jim?
Yes, sir.
Chairman? We have 13 minutes left in the meeting. We're not going to be able to get to public comment.
We are going to get to public comment.
Okay.
I'm not going to cut off the public.
You never get to go home.
Well, we go home a little later sometimes, but I am not going to cut off the public.
Turn to a pumpkin?
I think we've basically covered most of this as of the moment, so why don't we take the next three sections for the next meeting? And
Good.
my next thing on the agenda, and I think some of it has already been adverted
So,
to, was...
Jim, could I ask a question?
Surely.
We went through a whole plethora of questions here. I want to make sure Seth and I understand what we're expected to bring back for the next meeting. So
You have, in the next three sections of the attachment, that was the attachment to both the July meeting and this one, three more subjects. The three more subjects are removal of structure, disposal and use of contaminated materials, and beneficial use. What those sections are after, if you read the attachment, is information about those three subjects. And the information they ask, I hope, is fairly specifically laid out. And the same, obviously, for Holtec, because you're involved in all this too. It's what you're doing.
I just don't understand why we're talking about subject matter that is maybe a decade away and we're not concentrating. We had zero discussion in this meeting about what is Holtec going to be doing for disassembly activities for next month. One of the items Dave spoke about was that the work on the desegmentation that was completed is sitting in a storage container waiting for a cask approval.
No.
I think we should be asking questions like, when do we expect that cask approval? What are the delays? What could hold up that cask approval? What might occur if that cask approval authorization is not granted? Those are the things that are immediately coming down, I'll say, the conveyor belt that I think we should be a little more focused on.
Let me just say two things with respect to that. First, I agree those are questions that we need, and if you'll get them to Dave, I hope and expect that he will be able to deal with them in his report at the next meeting. Second, there was a lot of talk at the close of the last meeting by Mary Gatzlick and others, pointing out the fact that what was here was my questions, and for heaven's sake, will other people who have questions get them to me? No one did. That's not my fault.
I'm not blaming, I'm not putting any blame, Jim.
But if you've
I'm
got
trying
these-
to
if
figure
you- if
out.
you've- People have questions.
Could
You've
you
got to
let me
get them in.
finish?
I don't know what's in your mind.
Hey, Jim, respectfully, can you let me finish my question?
Of course.
All right. I appreciate that. You know, and I know it's a lot of effort that you put in to get those questions to us, you know, and we're doing our best to get through those, but it's a big volume. So it might be useful if we set some time aside in the agenda to talk about what's coming up in, say, the next 60 days or 90 days, the period taking us to the next meeting, and then book some time together to go through these questions for the panel. And then, of course, we always book time for the public questions.
And
So
my
I'm just
asking,
asking,
excuse me, Jack.
I'm asking you to consider that for our
I
future
will
meeting.
consider it. As a matter of fact, I'm in wholehearted agreement with it. What I am asking is you have a lot of questions in your mind, you've raised a lot of questions. Please put them in writing and get them to me and Dave.
What about the public? Let's do that.
Okay. Next item on here is the appeal, and that's been touched on, and I thought I would just basically give people here just what's happened. July 18, DEP issued a final determination refusing to grant Holtec's request to amend its permit. Holtec appealed that within DEP to a DEP administrative board on August 16th. September 5, that DEP internal board issued a fairly extensive scheduling order with all kinds of things in it. When people have to talk about settlement, when people have to file motions to intervene, that type of thing. The deadline they set for interveners was last Thursday, September 19th. September 26th, a week from then, Holtec and DEP are required to file responses to those requests for intervention. On the 19th of September, on Thursday, DEP filed a memory stick with a lot of what they call basic documents. There's an awful lot of stuff on that. It looks like all the documents that DEP probably looked at when they were making its determination, though not knowing how they came up with that, I certainly can't verify that. DEP and Holtec, supposedly according to the scheduling order, are now in settlement discussions. Did I get anything wrong?
I really can't talk about the ongoing litigation, so.
So just in terms of what the order sets out, what the order sets out.
I
know what's
think
happening.
you've accurately characterized the order.
Which is all I was trying to do, just to give people here a sense of what's going on. Okay, public comment. How many people want to speak? 1, 2, okay, remind me. 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. And we've got one online. Brian Campbell? 5, okay. I'm gonna, hopefully some will be a little short, maybe some will go over. I'm not gonna cut anybody off at 5 if we got over all minutes.
I'm Rosemary Shields. I'm with the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area. And I'm here, number one, is I don't know the new member who is on the handicap, and I would like his name and
Well, he
his
identified himself. Go ahead and tell me.
Yeah, and I have no idea who this person is.
No, but he did identify himself in the chat.
But I couldn't
Certainly,
hear. And what it
I'm
was.
happy
fine.
to
Yes, thank
repeat.
you.
My name is Gregory Wade, and I'm with the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities.
Massachusetts Department. And you're here because Massachusetts Public Utilities wanted you here as opposed to, everybody else has some sort of sponsor.
The statute says what agencies oppose people, and that is one of them that appoints.
Okay, great. No, as a public citizen, I didn't
No,
know that.
understood.
Right. Okay, and so David Noyes talked about the license termination plans. They were due this September. So you got from the NRC, they said, sure, you can do it in another year. That's what basically happened with the termination?
Well, we submit when we're ready. We provide
Oh.
them with the draft schedule. They'll review it when we submit it. We made the decision to submit it later
Okay.
so that we can provide additional information and learn from the two utilities that withdrew their submittals to make sure that ours provides as much information as it possibly can to meet the first-time quality standards for the NRC's review.
Okay, so it's basically quality standards and that it's basically going to come from lessons learned. There's not going to be any kind of addition of like termination, oops, no, we're going to do something else. It's just basically a termination with lessons learned.
Well, some of the lessons learned is that you can reduce the review time and the back and forth with the NRC by providing the subsurface DCGLs ahead of time, rather than providing them with the methodology that you intend to use to develop those DCGLs. By delaying it for a year, it allows us to fully develop those DCGLs and to submit them to the NRC and not have to worry about back and forth questioning.
I love it when you speak in acronyms, but I don't know what DCLGs means. Sorry.
So essentially, as Jack Priest was describing, they are derived concentrations for various radionuclides that have been associated with the plant during its lifetime, and the acceptable amounts of those radionuclides that would be allowed to stay in order to be able to ensure that the dose to an individual from all pathways does not exceed the NRC criteria of 25 millirem per year or the state criteria of 10 millirem per year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening. I have some pretty specific questions, but I should introduce myself first. Barry Potvin. I'm the chair of the Board of Health here in Plymouth. I'm also a retired college professor and research scientist with about 4 decades of experience working with radioisotopes and chemical mutagens, which was obviously pretty well controlled by our laboratory safety departments. So at the last meeting, I think I asked, or maybe it was Jack that asked, if you could give us an estimate of the cost for each truck to ship the 4,000 gallons of liquid waste to the disposal facility. Do you have a number?
So, see, that would, in order to be able to figure that out, it would be 20 million divided by the number of truck shipments. The number of truck shipments, if they were to go today, would be 960,000 gallons of water divided by 4,000 gallons per truck. So I haven't done the math, but it's pretty straightforward to get to what that would be. Bear in mind that that $20 million estimate was provided in 2022 dollars, so it may have changed, has not been updated since.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I did do the math, because that's one of the things I do. It comes out to approximately 225 truckloads to transport the remaining amount of water. Based upon the 2022 estimate that I guess came from Dr. Singh, it's probably going to cost in the neighborhood of about $900,000, I would guess, based on 2022 dollars, to transport all of the remaining wastewater, which is radioactive, to a disposal site. Does that sound reasonable?
No, I don't know how you can come to that figure. It's going to cost $20 million in 2022 dollars to transport and dispose of that water.
Well, that was for the amount of water that was present in 2022, correct?
Yeah, so it was a million gallons versus 934,000 gallons.
Because I think we had a figure of closer to 2 million gallons before the whole process started for decommissioning and demolition.
Right, but that wasn't 2022 inventories.
When was it? What date does that go back to then?
The 2 million gallons?
Yes.
2019.
Okay, thanks for the information. Next question would be the submersible heaters. Have they been re-energized as yet?
They have not.
And do you have any idea when they may be?
When we get to the heating season, we'll demonstrate their ability going into the heating season. I would expect that it would be within the next 1 to 2 months.
Okay, so the definition of the heating season is what?
Just at the time at which the nights are subject to freezing.
Okay, and when they are re-energized, they will be set for the same temperature as they were previously?
Yes.
90 or 95 degrees?
Yes, we don't have any intention to operate them any differently.
Okay, thanks for that information also. So is my understanding is that the evaporation goes on all the time, even at the ambient temperature when the heaters are not functioning, correct?
That's absolutely correct, yes, sir.
And so when you turn the heaters on again, it just enhances the evaporation rate.
It enhances the evaporation rate above what would be ambient for that set of conditions, yes.
Okay. And because of the nature of the concerns about the worker who received a radiation dose, are there monitors existing around the spent fuel pool that are accurately and able to provide readings about the amount of radioactive exposure of the workers?
There are area radiation monitors. They don't directly monitor tritium, but they do monitor any other radionuclides.
Okay, the reason why we asked this, and we have on the Board of Health a pediatrician and 2 people that have masters in public health. And because of my previous experiences with research, I know that for any additional exposure above the ambient exposure, which we all are subject to, it will cause some additional mutations. And most of the mutations, or at least some of the mutations, if they're directed at genes controlling cell division, can lead to cancer. And so when someone says, for instance, the NIC says, well, here is the amount that is acceptable or is allowed in terms of exposure, that to me doesn't mean that that necessarily is safe and there is no risk associated. It means that the risk is small if you look at it from the point of view of a single person. But in public health, we look at the risk to the entire population.
Barry, you're at 5.
Okay. So I have more to ask, but I guess I'll save it till the next time. Thank you.
It would be worthwhile to take a look at the annual radiological monitoring reports, see what the dose increase is to the hypothetical individual that would receive the most dose from all pathways, and see if that 4 1,000ths of a millirem is significant with respect to increased health effects or increased cancers.
Well, I basically know from my past experience working with microcuries of radioactivity on a rather daily basis that any increase, no matter how small, in exposure can lead to mutations which over a period of time can lead to increased risk for cancer.
So 4 100ths of a dental x-ray, would you consider that to be significant exposure to an individual?
Having just been to the dental office, I can tell you that although they always say the exposure with dental x-rays is very small, they do go to the extent of putting a lead apron on you, and they go to another portion of the room behind lead shields when they operate the x-ray machines. So.
But I don't, the x-ray's hitting me, I don't go to another part of the room.
Well, you can't. They're x-raying your mouth.
Understood.
My name is Peter Dalton. I'm a member of the Duxbury Shellfish Advisory Board. We have 30 oyster farms in our town. Also a member of the Stellwagen Bank Charter Boat Association. We have 145 members, very concerned about all this taking place. Dave, one quick question. Are the plans and specs available during the original construction of the buildings?
I'm sorry, I didn't, were what
Plans and
again?
specifications of the project built, and when you started construction, I believe it was August 26, 1968 through 1972. Do you have the plans and specifications that the contractors used?
We have several sets of plans and specifications, including modifications that happened over time. I can't tell you that we have the individual originals, but we have a large set of historical information.
I'm really interested in sections 3 and 7 of the specifications. Are they available to the public?
I don't, of what, sections 3 and 7 of what specifications?
3 is concrete.
Yes.
7 is all below-grade waterproofing and damp proofing. membranes, asbestos, cabicils. I'd like to, it should be in the specifications. The specifications that have been stamped for construction, not pre-construction. Are they available to the public? Most jobs, all construction of all buildings, they are available to the public. Right. Matter of fact, I'm just researching South Station right now. We're building a major project right there behind the old South Station. And I found drawings and specs from 1896. So I think we should be able to get those. I'd like to see them. I think the public would like to see them as well. Reason being is because all the below-grade damp proofing, if it was damp proofing, was done with asbestos back in those days, and then it changed to cabicil. And the reason why you use that is a filler to spray and apply all the damp proofing on the vertical face of a positive side of concrete walls, below grade. They changed that and to change it into cabicil because of the degree of asbestos that was used in the coating for damp proofing. Then there are membranes that are used, sheet membranes that are used on the positive side of the concrete wall to stop water from coming in. So I'd like to read about all that and make sure that we know what's going on as far as the removal of all these materials below grade. The other thing, there's been a lot of talk about $20 million shipping this material. If I'm not mistaken, Dr. Singh said at one time that he would drink this material. I'm just wondering why it would cost $20 million to ship this stuff if you could drink it. We have a local contractor that I'm pretty familiar with, which is Clean Harbors. I've spoken to them over there. They would be glad to ship this material to all the employees at Holtec, to their in-ground pools and their above-ground swimming pools and into their septic systems if you'd like to do that at a much cheaper cost than $20 million. And they're a local company. Clean Harbors is a great company. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Peter Moyer. I'm an emergency physician, retired, and I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of Physicians for Social Responsibility. My first comment is a question, actually. The recent data from just being tabulated as we speak, I guess, was, I think you mentioned it, from it was early in the meeting. We talked about new data, updating the data from 2023.
The most recent sampling data?
Yes. What was that of, and of what, of wastewater?
I don't have the details in front of me, but we're gonna make it available, and you'll be able to get it either through contacting Jim or on the Endicap website.
What was it of, though? I mean, I'm asking, was it wastewater? Was it coming out of the stack? Was it
No,
air?
it's the water in the reactor cavity, in the spent fuel pool, and in the dry separator pit.
Okay. So, and it was the same elements that were examined back in '23?
That's correct. What did I miss? The Taurus?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. And no additional ones?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's interesting that we should have mentioned before Ken Boosler. I actually have talked with him in preparation for this meeting, and he sent me his notes from the '23 data, and I want to take a minute and read it. It'll be more than a minute. It'll be two or 3 minutes. So he published this on May 26, 23, the data having been collected 3 months earlier or in March of 23. So, and here I'm reading it as I go. You can slow me down if you want. The Massachusetts Department of Public Health released a report this week. This is now May 26, 23.
Yeah, we did not release a report.
You did not, okay. With result, well, let me just read on here. With the results from the analyses of tritium and a set of 4 radioactive isotopes known as gamma emitters in the untreated water, stored in 3 locations in the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, PNPS. Results from Holtec and Mass State Lab agreed and were reported as anticipated, presumably referring to nuclear plants in general. This is the first set of data on the contents of wastewater stored at PNPS and provides the scale of the problem at hand for the 1 million gallons Holtec proposes to release, noting that they claim that water actually released would have lower levels after cleanup. How low is a question that remains to be answered, and the reasons why these issues are important is summarized below. Levels in these untreated waters are very high, whether with respect to drinking water standards, what is already in Cape Cod Bay as a result of nuclear testing in the 1950s and 60s, or in comparison to the contents of waste tanks at Fukushima in Japan. More specifically, compared to U.S. drinking water standards, these vary by country, tritium in the wastewater is 150 times higher than maximum allowed by U.S. drinking water standards, and cesium-137 is 40,000 times higher. Compared to background levels of radiation found in Cape Cod Bay, tritium levels in the untreated wastewater are 1 million, this is where we got the figure of 1 million, are 1 million times higher, and cesium-137 200 million times higher. This reinforces water should not be released prior to extensive cleanup. Removing 99% of the cesium-137 would still result in water with 2 million times more of this isotope than is currently found in seawater, and 400 times more than what is allowed by U.S. drinking water standards. Removal or cleanup will never be 100% effective. Once in the ocean, each radionuclide follows its own path, driven by its particular chemistry. Cesium, for example, is 100 times more likely to end up in fish than tritium, and cobalt-60 is 700 times more likely. Cesium is also 4,000 times more likely, and cobalt 300,000 times more likely to accumulate in seafloor sediments than tritium. Tritium, because it contains an isotope of hydrogen, is intrinsically a part of seawater and is so extremely difficult to remove, but does generally move with the ocean currents. However, some of the tritium would be found as organically bound tritium, OBT, about 10% of total tritium, according to some studies, and would be more likely to accumulate. The bioaccumulation and sediment accumulation factors described above are not exact numbers and vary according to fish species and type of seafloor.
Excuse me, Peter, we're pushing about 4.5 now.
Okay, I'll be quick.
I've circulated this.
You have?
I have circulated this, and I will probably try to get it posted onto our website.
Okay.
You might be, if you go to the bottom line, or
Well,
it might
I'll read his bottom line. The bottom line, this data shows us the extent of the problem presented by the waste stored at PNPS. Extensive cleanup of this waste is still needed, and I would hope that this has been completed, that after this has been completed, the wastewater would be reanalyzed with independent labs and using more sensitive methods to make a more complete analysis of additional radioactive elements of concern not covered in this report, particularly the alpha and beta emitters. At this point, a new plan could be evaluated based upon those results that would be part of a more complete radiological impact assessment. Such an RIA would need to consider not just doses, but the fate of those different radionuclides in the ocean where their biological and sediment accumulation differences accounted for. Monitoring with appropriate methods for tritium and non-tritium radionuclides in the ocean seawater, seafloor, and biota would be important before, during, and after releases to ensure the health and safety of the ocean and marine life to address public concerns, even if these levels of isotopes are low. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Hey, Jim, this is Jack.
Yes, Jack?
Just to clarify, we did not put out, the Department of Public Health did not put out a report. We provided the sample results to the NDCAP. This was for untreated water, not filtered, not cleaned, not intended for release. So, it's not completely accurate to compare drinking water standards, ocean water standards to this untreated water. The sampling, as we agreed to, was to give us a point on the map of what was currently in those Pilgrim vessels, so we could track the progress and for them to submit that information when they apply for any state permits that were needed. So that those numbers, I appreciate the level of effort on doing those comparisons, but we really need to be careful that we're doing a comparison of apples to apples when we're looking at both the radionuclides, what's treated, what's not treated, what's diluted, what's not diluted, and then make that assessment.
Thanks, Jack. I guess I'm not going to quibble over what is or is not a report, but the issues you've raised are really why I suggested you might talk to Ken Buessler.
May I add that Mass Department of Public Health did a gamma analysis and stated in the description of data that you intended to do testing for hard-to-detect radionuclides,
We made a
after
recommendation
it was
that
filtered.
hard-to-detect radionuclides should be assessed because there were other radionuclides, gamma emitters, that when they're found are indicative that you could have hard-to-detect. So when Holtec sent their samples to GEL Laboratories, I believe that's the laboratory they use, a certified national laboratory, they did a hard-to-detect radionuclide assessment. They also did a transuranic assessment, and no transuranics were identified.
I was just saying the last paragraph of your summary of the data, period.
Jim, I have a couple comments on this paper. May I make them?
Surely.
Because I know the gentleman who presented it probably is not able to provide information, but what concerns me is the statements that are out there talking about levels millions of times higher. There is no, what I would have expected to see was some kind of table saying this is what the drinking water is, this is what the NRC water is, and this is way down below what the Pilgrim water contains for radionuclides. That's not there. The people who will take this paper at face value are going to be really misled. I would caution posting this paper to our website until Mr. Buessler comes here and actually defends his paper in person. This is almost to me equivalent to yelling fire in a crowded theater. It's the information out there is not factual, and this is not a good thing for us to promote as the handicap panel. That's just my comment right there. I don't know how the rest of the panel feels about it, but truly, I think this paper needs to have the person who wrote it come here, talk to the panel, and then the panel ask him questions, and he can clarify some of these outrageous statements that he's been making on this paper. That's just my comment, and that's it.
I think the person who wrote this is Dr. Buessler. This is Dr.
Well-
Buessler. Excuse me, Mary, I'm speaking. That's Dr.
I'm sorry,
Buessler,
Jim, but
and
then
I
the author of the
suggested-
paper needs
excuse
to
me.
be here.
Excuse me? I had suggested that Jack might want to talk to him. There was also the suggestion made that we invite Dr. Buessler to address us, which I hope would satisfy your concerns.
I don't need to talk to him. He needs to come in and present his paper.
Fine.
I agree with Jack,
I would
100%.
Do I sound
I
like
would
I'm
expect
disagreeing
anything
with you?
presented that
I'm
would
certainly
be.
agreeing with Mary that it would be very nice to have Ken Buessler in here.
But what I'm concerned, Mr. Lambert, is us posting this document to our handicap site. It does not belong on here until we have further information on how this gentleman got to the point where he made these outrageous statements about the level of contamination and exposure.
Okay, without characterizing the statements, I would simply say that under the open meeting law, this is part of the public record. Sorry, that's the way
Then
the
we need
rule
to make-
reads. That's the way the rule reads.
All right, well, then there should be some statement that this paper is not endorsed by the handicap. I mean, that's all we can say, because I do not want people to think
Just
that
like
since
Dr.
it's on the
Conquest.
website that we're going, hey, yeah, this is right. This guy is 100% right. He's not. And that needs to be made
Let's get
perfectly
him
clear
in
if it
to
goes
talk
onto the
about
website.
it, because otherwise we're just going to be talking past each other. Okay?
I think your son wants to speak.
Hi, I'm Andrew Jacobs. I was
Wait,
coming in.
excuse me a minute. What is your name?
Andrew Jacobs. We've gone over this the last 6 months. I've
No,
told you my name.
Excuse me a moment. This is, I believe, the third time you've spoken to us. The
Yeah,
first
over the
time
last
was-
6 months.
The first time was in January.
Oh, it's more than 6
I
months.
asked you what your name was.
Mm-hmm.
You said Kyle.
No.
Yes, you did, it's recorded. I then asked you what was your last name, and there was a long pause. And I believe at that stage, you didn't say.
Jimmy boy, I'm under no obligation to tell you my name.
And so you haven't.
Thank you.
I-
Anyways, I was going to ask if this paper that had gone up on the site was endorsed by the handicap meeting. I had seen it earlier and didn't see any tables or hard numbers behind it.
I haven't, handicap has not been asked one way or another to.
I'm asking you right now.
I'm not going to take a vote on it.
Aren't you the chairman?
Yes, and I'm not going to take a vote on it.
I think you should.
You're entitled to your opinion, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Jimmy.
He's so rude. God.
Anything else? Then I think it's probably time to adjourn. Just looking forward to the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to address the Ken Brusler paper.
Surely.
And I do think that it is unfortunate to take some, a paper from a noted PhD, very noted oceanographer, that says notes, on it, and without really understanding what his notes were reflecting, and that he didn't provide these notes to us, but it came via a public participant is troubling. And the fact that I tried very hard to get him here to the Endicap to present well over a year ago is also troubling. So I would hesitate to just throw it up there without some qualification of the way that this paper came, if indeed you think that it really has to be published to the website. I think it's unfortunate, and I think that it supports a lot of misinformation rather than gives information. And I think that's what our role is, to provide clarity to a very difficult subject, and not to overly confuse that subject without, as you say, inviting the doctor here to give us some presentation, to have an open discussion regarding his understanding of what the tests were about, and his understanding about whether this was going to be released into the bay, or that it's just the first step in a long process of trying to understand how we should address this complicated subject.
All I can say is I hope that I or some future chair has better luck in getting Ken Busler in here than you apparently did, because I think that probably should be
I hope
a fairly certain
you
step.
do, and I hope you do make contact with him and tell him what our predicament is about the notes.
Yeah,
Now,
that's
Mr.
a perfectly
Chairman,
fair
isn't it-
request.
Isn't it paramount that we really understand how we came up with these different levels which he's talking about?
I'm not saying otherwise, which is why I'm suggesting there are obviously a lot of people here who think all of this is very misleading. I kind of doubt that Dr. Busler does, but I think if given the questions that have been raised, the only way I see potentially to resolve them, let's face it, we don't have subpoena power, is to see if he will come in and explain his views and what this is all about. And I'll try to do that. What
So
more,
are you-
what more would you have me do?
Just do that. Just wait to produce that until you get.
That's fair, that's fair, that's fair. Though this is part of the public record, we were not required to put it onto the website.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion, we adjourn.
Seconded.
Discussion on the motion, I would like, Andrew, may I make 2 points before we adjourn? First is that the next meeting, we will take the next 3 items of the discussion we had tonight. The other thing is that the last item on the agenda for the next meeting will be an election of a chair and vice chair. We elected the chair and vice chair in November of last year. Our enabling statute says that is a one-year term, an annual appointment. And so existing, Ms. Gatzlick and I, our terms run out 2 days after the November meeting, so it's time to have an election, so that will be the last item on the agenda in November. I hear a motion to adjourn. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Second, again.
Thank you, Seth. Okay. Unfortunately, the way the rules read, we've got to even do this by roll call. Dave?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Pine?
Aye.
Mike?
Yes.
Mary Gutzlick?
Yes.
What about me?
You're not to you yet.
Oh.
Mary Gutzlick? I can't hear you.
I said yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Myself, yes. Kevin?
Yes.
Mary Lampert?
Yes.
Chuck Priest?
Yes.
Seth Pickering?
Yes, sir.
Dave Bryant?
Yes.
Jeffrey Wade?
Yes.
Kristen Callahan? Christopher Callahan?
Yes. Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
Mary Waldron?
Yes.
Unanimous, we're adjourned. I have all these yeses in my box.